Okay, good morning, everybody. This is a special meeting of the Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority for Harrisburg. Just to let you know, this meeting is being recorded. So everything that is conversed will be in the official record. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our chair, Audrey Carter, to chair the meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeffrey, and thanks everyone for being able to get together this morning. The special meeting is specifically to discuss the draft of the 5-year plan, as Jeffrey mentioned, submitted to us on October 30th. The mayor had proposed that he would make a presentation to us regarding the plan as well as the budget for FY21, and unfortunately notified us yesterday that he will not be attending. The next two dates relating to the plan, I just want to remind everyone, are December 14th, which is when the city will deliver to us their revised final draft of the plan. And then just 2 days later, December 16th, is our meeting at which we will discuss the changes, review anything that might have changed. And it is during that meeting that we would expect to take an action on the plan. Today's conversation is open. We want to hone in on issues that we have with the plan. You all have the letter that we sent to the mayor after the first round, trying to, as I call it, establish the buckets where we would perhaps want to draw his attention. So let's open it up. There are so few of us. If people want to keep their mics on all the time, that's fine. That might make it easier. Ralph, we understand if you want to keep it off for a bit. If you have a distraction there, that is fine. So December 2nd, let's go.
If no one else is chomping at the bit, since I have a moment here with my baby son here being quiet, I might take advantage of the opening to give you my observations and comments. The comments that I wanted to bring up, I did email them to Neil Grover, questions for the city regarding the plan, and I did follow up with Neil. I haven't heard back. Haven't gotten a response to questions. Generally, my questions are and concerns are focused on the major concerns and questions are focused on a couple of categories. One of them is the capital improvement projects. The annual totals, and the total is significant variance from the plan that we approved in 2019. And there's no explanation or detail provided. It's really a summary of a list of projects. I think, in my day job, I work in real estate and we deal with capital investment and capital projects. And I would like to know what the city does to plan, manage its projects from a budgetary perspective. I think that would be, I think it would be prudent to know what that is, because these are huge dollar numbers. And right now the city is proposing to fund it with the use of fund balance. So it's like using your savings account, you only get to use it once. So I'm concerned about that. And I would like to see further information and some explanations as to how these estimates are being done. Regarding on a similar vein, I was really interested in seeing actuals versus budget for the city's capital projects over the last couple of years. And I know that these are, again, big dollar numbers. And I think it would do a lot for me personally, again, who works in that sort of space. I think it would give me a lot of confidence to see how the city manages budget versus actual. I think it's an important thing to be able to demonstrate. So as a large category, that's a pretty major concern that I have with the 5-year plan. Another major concern I have is just as a category is the waste removal services. And again, from a financial perspective, we got some information, over the last, 12 months or so about the Neighborhood Services Fund performance. There's many millions of dollars that are in receivables. There are many millions of dollars that were assigned as uncollectible by the CPAs last year during the audit. It was uncovered, and it appears in the city's plan that the Neighborhood Services Fund continues to run at a deficit, and the fund balance approaches zero at the end of the 5-year plan from its current position. So I think that's a really, really serious issue. That fund should, seems to me that it should be not just not approaching zero, but it should be self-sustaining. I'm also concerned, as in the plan, that the city proposes not to reimburse the general fund out of the Neighborhood Services Fund, meaning that the city overhead and administration out of general fund expenses, and proposing not to be reimbursed in order to preserve liquidity in the Neighborhood Services Fund. That would be concerning because that implies that general fund revenues, aka taxpayers, are subsidizing trash collection, which is and I could probably turn to someone like Doug, who is one of the folks very knowledgeable when the strong plan was composed. But my understanding is that the reason for separating the Neighborhood Services Fund was so that it could be run as a proper independent business entity. So the fact that the overhead is provided from general fund is great. It's normally considered efficient to have shared overhead, but if the shared overhead is not being reimbursed to the general fund, that would be highly concerning, in addition to the fact that it's already projected to run major deficits that drives the fund balance to zero. The third major concern I have has to do with the expense side. On the expense side, the headcount from the previous plan from last year, they've proposed to increase it by 50 positions. And that's more than a 10% increase in headcount year over year. And that wasn't shown in the plan last year. And I think if, as a city, the plan is to provide a completely different approach to staffing and for the purposes of services to residents and stakeholders, I think that warrants a lot more explanation, especially because that commitment, once made, those expenses are not a one-time expense. Unlike the capital expenses, it's a quasi-permanent, recurring expense obligation year after year after year. And they're not small numbers, they're quite large numbers. Commitment just in 2021, the general fund expenditures are projected to go up $5.2 million, more than the budget for the prior year. I am concerned due to the fact of the uncertainty regarding the economic circumstances and the coronavirus situation. Obviously, we're all concerned about how revenues come in, but I think this is we're finding out here in November a dramatic change in direction for the city's approach to its expenditure side. So I find it concerning, and I do think it warrants a lot of explanation, a lot of due diligence, and for the sake of prudence, I do think it entails a lot of additional explanation and reasonable explanation as to the decision and ultimately the rationale to make those commitments. Since I'm getting some background noises here, I think that my time is up. And that to me, I think are really the major obstacles to this plan going from a first draft to a plan that's my 2 cents, Madam Chair and colleagues.
Thank you, Ralph. I just want to add a statistic that I pulled up as I looked through it relative to what you just said. In the 3 categories of real estate, EIT, and LST, the projection for FY21 is 99% of what we received in actuals in FY19. So again, I think that speaks to just being totally surprised given what everyone else is assuming will happen across the country, and they're scaling back their forecasts. We are at 99, and if it just misses the mark by 10%, that'll throw everything into havoc. Kathy, Doug?
Go ahead, Doug.
Well, just a couple things. I'm going to be interested in seeing the revised draft and how it takes into account Act 114, the extension of the extraordinary taxes. And the thing that I'm looking at most closely was the expenditure out of reserves and spending that down. I'm told that the extension of the local services tax and the extraordinary use, I think in budget projections, $15 million drawdown this coming year on reserves is intended for the purpose of paying off outstanding debt obligations and all the things that are part of those restructurings. And so I'll be interested to see how that plays out. And the only reason I raise it, or one of the reasons I raise it, is that there is still a cliff of sorts as the LST is phased out at the 10-year and 15-year marks. So just using this year's projected numbers, it's a $2.2 million drop at 10 years and another 2.2 or so after that. So bottom line, about $4.5 million that's gone from revenues at the 15-year mark. And I know this is only a 5-year plan, but there should be some mention of that as a part of the narrative. There's probably still a number of other small things piece by piece through the budget. You know, some of the, I was looking at the IT capital, for example, and a couple things like that. I also saw tiny stuff like in the PowerPoint presentation, it's showing taxes increasing at 0.05%. It's actually 0.5% if you do the calculation, but that's, you know, minor stuff. But overall, yeah, I'm interested in seeing how Act 114 gets integrated into the next iteration of the city's draft plan.
I think we've also discussed the whole vagueness of several of the initiatives where they propose the community services division, and there really aren't pro formas or I call it meat to this. How are they working with other local agencies that are already in that space, county? And then similarly, looking at Paxtang and Pembroke, entering into those negotiations when in fact we still haven't seen how Stilton has come together, and they're much smaller, and yet this is where we see an investment being needed in capital and staffing. So it, I think, helped to frame that a little better. And again, I think this can be a discussion, so please just jump in if there's something you want to add to it. It will help us all make sure we have a whole picture.
Audrey, I'd like to, Madam Chairman, I'd like to see some more detail on what is required by the collective bargaining agreements. I noticed on the new budget document that we just received in one of the departments, a reference to 7.5% increases. I mean, if that's what we're talking about, that's really, really significant. So I think we have to be able to sort out what we're contractually obligated to do from what we would like to do. I think in the recent budget document I saw, as well as the 5-year plan, there's just an underemphasis overall on COVID and the necessary recovery period from COVID. I don't see virtually any reference to that in the budget document that was just delivered, and not an awful lot in terms of the 5-year plan. And I know some of the estimates I've seen have talked about a prolonged period of time to get back up to where we were pre-COVID, and may it be quick, but I don't think anyone wants to plan on it being very, very quick. I like Ralph's reference to the capital budget projects, I noted that the budget talks about a decrease in IT amounts, and yet there's a reference that I saw in the capital budget document that was attached to the budget, and I'm not sure right now, and someone can clarify for me whether that has been adopted or if that is a proposed, some $2 million for computer infrastructure. Frankly, some of the businesses that have been able to operate during the COVID situation have been able to operate only because of the emphasis that they had previously put on their computer and technology services. I'd like to know what our plan overall is for computer services in the city, because from what I can see, we're still dealing with COBOL, which I'm told is a dead language. Actually, I thought the dead language was Latin, not COBOL, but I understand if you're a computer specialist, you probably consider the two about the same. But I mean, there are some basic, what I'm going to call infrastructure within the administration of Harrisburg that I don't see really addressed. Similarly, we've got to figure out what we're doing with that audit exception in terms of moving to the required budgetary standards. And I'd like to see more on the economic development side, which we have been beating the drum on for a long time now. I do see a reference in the new budget proposal for, it appears to me, an economic development director at the $90,000 level. That's probably a level where, at least in my limited research, we could find someone to actually do something with that. I also noted that in the budget, there is very little reference to grants. And I mean, I would think that that's something we want to look at as potential free money for us and something that we want to make the most of in terms of any budget, any annual budget process, but also in terms of the 5-year process. So those are kind of buckets that bother me in particular. And if the departments are operating without the proper infrastructure, as I'm calling it, I think that only makes the city's recovery much, much tougher in the long run. I think we've got to figure out how the various departments, even with different programs and program needs, and I'm talking computer program needs, get on the same page in terms of basic overall. My impression, rightly or wrongly right now, is that each of these multiple departments, and there are a lot of them, given the numbers that we've got of employees, given the numbers that we've got of revenues available, are operating kind of in their own little circles, silos, without having an overall implementation. So I think we've got to look at this almost like you would a government administration major and say, let's make some sense out of this. And in making sense out of this, hopefully we have savings. I mean, if one department is not using all of its supply money, what are we doing with that? Is that going to be available to the other departments? We've got it just too siloed at the moment for my liking.
I think those are great points, Kathy, and I think that also plays into another point that we've tried to emphasize that the mayor repeatedly has in his budget document, which is an emphasis on performance measurements, which really aren't available at all on the city. And that, I think, to your point, which units are effective, which are efficient. How can we streamline some of those things to make sure that the least amount of money is spent for the maximum amount of output? Also, just relating, Kathy, to what you said, I agree, both on the grant side and on the pilot side, the projections that they make in the out years, just they're so conservative, and they shouldn't be, especially on the grant side. We should be able to leverage more. I think that was like a $25,000 increase year over year, and pilot was 15,000 year over year increase.
I just want to mention that we had gotten a communication from Neil that he's having trouble logging into the meeting. I have now twice sent him the link again by 2 separate emails. So I'm not sure what his issue is, technical issue is, but he is trying to join the meeting. I'll let you know.
Maybe Moman can help him.
I sent him the link twice now, so
Okay.
3 times altogether. So I don't know what. Obviously, the link worked for everyone else that you're all
Right.
here.
My point toward moving into the current century on computers and technology.
Point made. I think the other thing that has been relative to Ralph's is sort of the lack of inventory just on the city side. And that also feeds a little bit into the capital improvement plan and, you know, what gets added year over year.
I thought it might be helpful, Madam Chair, if we go back to the Act 124, as you and I had previously discussed, and talked a little bit about this section on authority review and approval of the 5-year fiscal plan, just so that we make sure everybody's on the same page as to what the Act says, our enabling legislation. If that's okay with you.
Yep. Also, if you want to shoot an email to Neil, that if you can't get on, it is recorded so he can watch it later. We would like to have him here.
I will definitely send him the link at the end of Sunday. He has not replied to either of my emails. So.
Okay.
Back with reference to Act 124. I just had it, and now I seem to have.
Well, while you're looking for it, yours is going to be section 209. I did review section 210 fairly closely last night. And I would draw attention to section A3, in which the authority shall prescribe the supporting information required in connection with the financial plan. I know the mayor had said that we have plenty of information to review, and I think in our letter there was much emphasis on actually information that we thought was missing that would help us review.
The authority review of the plan, the authority shall promptly review the financial plan, proposed operating budget, and capital budget submitted by the city. In conducting the review, the authority shall request from the controller of the city an opinion, which we have done, prepared in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards and with respect to the reasonableness of the assumptions and the estimates of the financial plan. And I think Ralph mentioned something about reasonableness of assumptions and estimates in the proposed document. There it is. Not more than 30 days after submission of the financial plan, the proposed operating budget, the authority shall determine whether the financial plan projects balanced budgets based on prudent, reasonable, and appropriate assumptions as described in this section for each year of the plan. That's the standard. It's prudent, reasonable, and appropriate assumptions. Secondly, the proposed operating budget and capital budget also submitted with the plan are consistent with the proposed financial plan. If the authority determines that the criteria under those 2 subsections, prudent, reasonable, and appropriate, and the budget being consistent, if the authority determines that the criteria under those sections are satisfied, the authority shall approve the plan. So that's the phrase, approve the plan. The authority should not be bound by the opinion of the controller or any city official. If the authority fails to take any action regarding a financial plan within 30 days following the submission of the plan to the authority, the financial plan as submitted shall be deemed approved. Authority disapproval of the plan. If the authority disapproves the proposed financial plan of the assisted city, the authority shall, when it notifies the assisted city of the authority's decision, state in writing in reasonable detail the reasons for the disapproval, including the amount of any estimated budget imbalance. Then the assisted city shall submit a revised financial plan to the authority within 15 days. The revised plan must eliminate the budget imbalance. No more than 15 days after the submission of the revised plan, the authority shall determine whether the revised plan satisfies the criteria under section G3, and that's the section that says prudent, reasonable, and appropriate assumptions. So that is the standard and the circle of approval, disapproval, resubmission, standard, and so on. As I understand it, I don't know if you or Ralph have a different interpretation.
No, I think that, again, it might be good to look at the timing of what has occurred. So the city was to present the 5-year plan on October 31st. We were asked by Neil at our meeting in November, to treat it as a draft. Therefore, we also granted an extension to December 14th to provide that final. So it is now at December 14th, as I understand it, that 30-day window will open for us to respond again, unless we approved it. Obviously, then that 30 days would not.
Or take no action. A no action is deemed an approval. I just want to.
Right.
And we are meeting on the 16th of December as our regular meeting.
Yeah.
Then our next meeting, I don't have the calendar in front of me, is until more than 30 days after December 14th, right? So our January meeting is beyond that.
27, right.
So in other words, we would either have to take action on the 16th of December or call a special meeting before the 14th of January to still be within that initial 30-day window.
Right.
Make some kind of action.
Yep.
And that sounds like an up-down vote on either approval or disapproval. That's
the way I read it.
I agree, but it does say that the authority has a responsibility to then, after the up-down vote, to transmit some reasonable detail as to why. So
Right.
You can't just disapprove it and let it sit there. You need to provide specifics to the city so that they have an opportunity to revise the document. So you can't, and that seems fair. And I'm sure that's what the authority would do in such a circumstance.
So it sounds like you can't do an approval with contingencies. You'd have to do a disapproval, which is explained.
Well, last time we did an approval with comments. It's not contingencies. It was just, here's an approval, but here are some concerns we have. So that was the 2019 decision of the board. Approval straight out, not conditional, but here are some significant concerns we have with your plan. So, and there's nothing in the act that would prohibit that type of action again. But if you do a disapproval, you must provide the city with some reasonable detail as to why, to give them an opportunity to revise it.
And again, we have the luxury of more time, which is why this robust discussion is important, because it's really helping us understand and be able perhaps to come together on a list of reasons why it would not be, why we would disapprove it. And in 2019, unfortunately, Kathy and Ralph will remember this, we had about 2 hours to approve this because it had to be done before the city council meeting, which was, I think, happening that night in the room next to us, right? We met in the city council chambers, walked up to someone's office, and then came down. So I think that's, I guess, the other timeline piece that's in this. That obviously doesn't matter if it is, we don't approve it, then that rolls into January action by city council.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that the city council action is dependent one way or the other on the authority's action. I think you operate independent of each other. And just to clarify, I completely agree with what you said. Even if the authority were to hypothetically disapprove the plan on December the 16th at your regular meeting, you would have in essence till January, whatever, 13th, 14th, to submit to the city the basis of your disapproval. You don't have to do it that then and there, but you have to do it within the 30-day window that starts with the submission to the authority on December 14th of the revised plan. So you'd have time to craft a explanation that meets the requirements of the act. And then once you submit that to the city, whether it's on December 16th or January 13th, that starts the 15-day clock for them to be able to take another stab at resubmitting the plan to the authority, and the circle continues. If the authority fails to take action at a time, obviously it's deemed approved. If the city fails to take any action, then they're in default of not submitting a completed plan. And then it gets a little murky. We've discussed several times, what are the next steps after that? Let's assume that that's not going to happen, that they would continue to try to revise the plan to meet the requirements of the authority. But that's a little more complicated. If they don't come back after you say, here are the deficiencies, if they don't come back with a revised plan, they are then in default of not submitting a approved 5-year financial plan. Or you could grant them more time. Remember, one of the principles that we've established with the city is that upon mutual agreement of the parties, the clock can be amended or suspended. That's entirely up to mutual agreement of the parties. So that's the act timetable, but the parties can negotiate some other various timetable that they're in mutual agreement upon.
Yeah, and we are so out of whack right now based on the fact that the next one is due at the end of April, to make sure that we can work it through the machinery, so to speak, by June adoption. It also gets a little confusing with which budget is which. You know, would the plan actually be the budget of FY20 if it were being filed on time? And now we're aligning it with FY21. So you're right about the relaxation all the way around as far as timing and what we want when we want it. And we really, I think the piece that poor Jeffrey has been trying so hard over this past year is to really begin to work with the city as this is being formulated. And that is also, as part of the act, is to work in consultation so that we really have this background. We know that we have boots on the ground collecting and sharing information more frequently than we're currently getting.
I second that, Madam Chair. I do think it makes it more challenging to understand the plan that comes across the email wire, without any collaboration or cooperation leading up to it. I think it makes it challenging to understand where the city is coming from when they show up with millions of dollars of new spending on initiatives that seemingly come out of nowhere, in capital projects that are inexplicably in variance with the plan simply from 1 year ago. I think it really behooves us to engage with the city. I know Neil's not here, and Jeffrey and Audrey, I'm sure we can reach out to Neil in the interim to try and bridge that gap.
Bridge that gap is what he said.
As to what happened over the last year, can bridge that gap.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think you're right, Ralph, that what we're seeing here is that plans are being developed, by the city in terms of the mayor's vision of the management of the city. So, for example, we talked about the very large addition of personnel to the FY21 budget. Clearly, there's a rationale and a programming and an initiative there. But since it wasn't reflected in any previous plan, and from the authorities' view, it sort of came out at the spur of the moment, and he might have been working on it for months, but we didn't see that. It's very hard to say that's consistent with the long-term strategic planning of the city. And if it is, that's fine. But we obviously, the part of the responsibility of the authority is to encourage the city not to go year to year, but to actually have a 5-year view and think of these things over time and what their impact would be to the overall finances of the city. So that's hard to do.
Yeah, and to follow further on that, I would like to have a better feeling about the process for this planning, because it was in a conversation we've had recently, even as recently as our last conversation with Neil, in which he informed us that these plans come together at the last minute and they're literally, the ink is wet before they ship it off to us. So I think when we see major variances to a plan and the narrative behind it is that the ink is still wet on the ideas, I think that's kind of runs antithetically to the idea of 5-year planning. I think that's a criticism that we could use in a constructive manner to help the city help develop plans that are little more fully fleshed out before they're sent across the email wire. And I think that would benefit everyone across the city, the taxpayers, all the stakeholders, to know that there is a plan that's not just being drawn up in the weeks before a submission deadline, but there's actually a plan that for management purposes is being developed and constantly being reviewed, constantly being updated, constantly being monitored and budgeted against. I think that would give me confidence. I'm not speaking as an authority member. I'm speaking as a stakeholder in the city and as a resident.
And I would add to that, city council would benefit from that, because I know that they lament often as well that they've not been briefed. And while they mirror the city operations so well, it would seem fairly easy to make sure they at least are up to speed. And we could at the same time try and mirror that with our participation with those city council members.
Just have 2 final points and then I'm done. My first one is that we know from the mayor's conversations with us that he has relied very heavily on the assistance of Mr. Dan Connolly, who has attended a number of our meetings, to assist him in the development of these documents. Obviously, I would be more than happy to work with, communicate with, meet with Mr. Connolly, and if that's a way of getting into the development of the planning process, I'm more than willing to take the time to do that. And I've spoken to him before, and I find it he's a wealth of information about what's going on in city finances. So I think that's a good strategy that I'm just putting out there as a possibility. And then my last point is that we've been told by Mr. Grover, and I'm sure that this will get an update by the 16th by our regular meeting, about this DCED standardized reporting process, which we have not had the pleasure of seeing. But whatever that template is, I think beyond the 5-year plan, just having the city have a standard reporting format that the ICA can review on a regular basis would be really helpful. And I'm optimistic that when the state and the city work out that template, that can be a similar or same template for the ICA going forward as well. So haven't seen that final work product, but looking forward to learning more about it by our regular meeting on the 16th of December. That's my last comment.
Madam Chair, I have kind of a jump ball that I'll throw to Jeff and Mark and Marita, because they may have information or not on it. But it seems to me doing a 5-year plan at this point is extraordinarily difficult given all the COVID stuff that's going on. I'm sure other municipalities are looking at this and using some standardized assumption or some different assumptions for, when we might expect to at least come back to the 2020 levels. Does anyone have anything that they could share with us? Because if we've got to say we approve or we disapprove on the approval, support the disapproval. I think we need to know what kind of assumptions people are using on all of these increases that are being shown. Anybody want to touch that?
I think I can at least speak to what's being assumed at the state level and what we're looking at. Haven't really drilled down to municipal level budgets, but just in our own budget process, we look at the economic forecasts, and there's, as you stated, there's tremendous uncertainty going forward about what the economic recovery will look like, and even what the epidemiologists say about the course of the pandemic and what will happen. I mean, looking at projections right now, we may not see employment in the Northeast return to pre-pandemic levels, and this is like a broad area, so it's not specific to a locality, until 2023. So there are different estimates, and realistically, the estimates change each month. We see revised economic forecasts. So there's much more uncertainty going forward than there typically would be. The variance between our high-low scenarios is greater now than it had been previously. So this doesn't really tell you much that you don't already know, but I can confirm that just for state planning purposes, there's much more uncertainty going forward just because of the pandemic.
Thanks, Mark, because I had read some things, and obviously I'm not following this as closely as some folks are, but I had read some things that said a 3-year recovery wouldn't be, out of the question. And in that case, maybe we should be looking at flattening some of these numbers for a period of time. That's going to be real hard in the city of Harrisburg, but even with the additional taxing power in place, it can be an expensive city to run. I appreciate that, Mark.
Yeah, a couple of things. I've been monitoring a bit how this discussion's been running on the websites for the National League of Cities and for National Association of Counties. I haven't been on government finance officers at all, but I'm guessing there's more there. For the Pennsylvania model, we're insulated just a little bit because of the strong reliance on a real property tax, and one that is highly dependent on, shall we say, broadly spaced out reassessments. And so, that does flatten the curve a bit on the revenues for the property tax. So really, it's less a matter of change in valuation than on whether the sites are occupied in the number one, and number two, whether the owners are making timely payments or are deferring. So we're a little bit more exposed on the earned income tax side and how the employment trends run, particularly in the city. And then obviously the one that has been taken into account is the most movable for us is the parking revenues. And on the parking revenues, I think the issue there, I think they've already at least deferred recovery of that out to 2022. Whether that's optimistic or not, I don't know. And for two reasons. Number one, the economy bouncing back, but number two, how durable telework becomes, and whether that's a trend that ultimately affects both parking revenues and then secondarily how the earned income tax is paid, and also local services tax, and then spin-offs on other city operations, in-city business operations like restaurants and comparable.
Thanks, Doug.
Doug makes a good point about the relative stability of the property tax at the state level, we were much more reliant on income, sales taxes, income, both personal and corporate, and those are subject to more uncertainty going forward and would rely more on the employment levels. I just reiterate that Doug's point about property taxes is very much on target.
And I think as I just survey different cities when they're presenting their budgets, they're all really looking at trade-offs because they see that they're not going to have the pie they had before, and so now they got to figure out which sliver goes or which trades. So that makes me think we're a little bit of an aberration here.
And that takes me back to, we really need to know what we are required to pay under the collective bargaining agreements, because, you know, if that is required under the existing collective bargaining agreements, we're going to have to look at that, in my mind, first, before we look at what could be considered the wish list of things that we want to do.
So we've spent some good time looking at specific issues. I thank you, Jeffrey, also for walking us through the actual act description of actions that are ahead of us. I think obviously we need to continue to think about this. The city has budget hearings next, I believe it's Tuesday, Wednesday, and then a legislative session on Thursday, where I believe they're looking to approve or not approve or delay the FY21 budget. And so if you're available, they are YouTube, and you can listen to them live, no pictures needed, which is nice. But that may also help inform us. And I'm planning on listening, I think Jeffrey is, and we will report out if there's anything that we learn or PowerPoints, because I know last year there were several PowerPoints that came up during that we can share, so that we all come with the same educated mind to the meeting the following week. Is there any other business? Is there anything that we didn't touch on that someone would like us to briefly discuss?
I think from between now and the 16th, obviously, the authority needs to consider what kind of action it wants to take. And it has a variety of choices, but you know, that's the consideration for the next meeting.
Right.
If I may make a suggestion, are we expecting to receive, and let me proceed with the question, are we expecting to receive from the city the formal submission on the 14th?
That's
Yes.
what we were told.
And the mayor reiterated that in email yesterday.
Yeah, right, okay. May I make a suggestion, if it's possible, for Jeffrey to collaborate, and I leave it, Jeffrey, to you to figure out how to do that, because to date, you haven't had any success engaging with the city in any collaborative manner on any of these planning exercises. But since we're trying to perform our due diligence here and trying to perform an important function for the public good, I think it would behoove Jeffrey nevertheless to at least try to engage with our colleagues and counterparts at the city prior to the 14th, if nothing more than
And you're freezing just a little bit, Ralph. So your last and most important point likely didn't come through.
Reach out to the city to try to collaborate.
Yeah. But I think there's one more point.
let me try and just fix I think it's my internet connection. 1 second.
So yeah, we will
I will be happy to do
We're
that.
going to send Jeffrey to the front line.
Right. I will
Your
reach out.
back, Ralph.
Thank you. I was just, the finishing point was only that in the past, these submissions arrive, prior to a meeting with minimal time to see them. And I think as an added benefit, it would be nice for the board via Jeffrey to have more knowledge about what is going on as far as changes versus the draft that was previously submitted to us that we've been considering now.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. We now come to public comment. Marita, you're here. Can I put you on the spot if there's anything you wanted to add to the discussion? I appreciate that you came today. And
Oh, yes, Madam Chairman. I watched the session last night. I don't know if anyone else did, concerning the new AMBAC agreement. I would encourage everyone to read that resolution, which includes the attachments for the agreement. Thank you, Audrey, for forwarding that. That's a significant agreement and certainly will likely benefit the city, but still important for you as a organization, as an authority, to review that pretty carefully. I think many of the comments that were made today appear valid. And although I'm not forming an opinion, I'm just saying that I'm taking into consideration what is said today. And I think that next week's hearings probably would be very valuable also to be participating in for the authority. Thank you.
thank you, Marita. Any other public comments, Jeffrey?
We received none other.
I didn't think so. Well, in that case, could I ask for a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all those in favor say aye.
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 Well, thank you all very much. We will see each other on the 14th, the 16th, and don't forget the 17th, because that's our combined audit meeting. So obviously we'll send out reminders and links and everything else. So thank you all again for finding time to squeeze this meeting in.
Thanks, everybody. We'll be in touch. Remember, you can always contact me one-on-one in between, so I'm here.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, everyone.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Goodbye.
Stay
See you.
safe.
Yes, definitely.